Hello and welcome to Happy Birthday ADA, an interview series for the City of Pittsburgh. I'm Natasha Molina, Senior Talent Development Coordinator with the Department of Human Resources and Civil Service, and we are here counting down until July 26, 2020, the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In order to celebrate and wish the ADA a happy birthday, we're doing this four-part series, starting with this week, week one, the history of the ADA. I have with me today Dr. Natalie Burick, Director of Disability Services with Slippery Rock University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Burick has her bachelor's degree in community programming for Americans with Disabilities, which she earned from SRU. She also has her master's degree in K-12 school counseling from Slippery Rock as well. She additionally has a doctorate in education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She's worked with SRU for close to 10 years now, and we are so excited to have her here to help us talk a little bit about the ADA. So thank you so much, Dr. Burick. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. So jumping right in, can you give us a bit of an overview on what is the ADA? What is the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Sure. So the ADA was enacted by President George H.W. Bush in 1990. And it's a civil rights law that protects Americans with disabilities in just many facets of life, including transportation, employment, telecommunications, things that people without disabilities normally take for granted. This law was enacted to protect individuals' disabilities in the public workplaces, and like I said, mostly the public sectors of the United States. And so it was an effort from Congress and the president, and it was something that took many years to enact, but it finally was enacted in 1990.
Fantastic. So with the ADA, what was it that made the federal government need to step in? What was the world like before an act like this was put forward?
So just in doing basic research and understanding and reading about the law, I can only assume that it was probably pretty limiting for Americans with disabilities. Like I said before, things that we normally would take for granted for a person without a disability, just public transportation, for example, accessing a subway system or having an alternative entrance for a wheelchair user into a building. Those are things we don't typically think about, or just like the doorway in your office. How many inches wide is the doorway? Is it appropriate for a person using a wheelchair? And those are just very simple examples of things that come to mind immediately. But there are so many different aspects. In my office, I have an accessible desk. So part of my desk lifts up and down for people with people who use a wheelchair, or if they come in with a parent, because I work at a school and I meet with students and parents. My desk is accessible for that reason. Having telecommunication systems in place for deaf individuals, relay services, sign language interpreters in the public settings or systems in schools, etc. All of those things are now required by law, and I'm sure knowingly and unknowingly ADA was violated. Obviously, before it was enacted, people were violating law, but that's why it was put into place to protect those individuals. And like I said before, it is a civil rights law, and it was the very first civil rights law to protect those people.
Absolutely. It always blows my mind how the littlest things that we can take for granted can make the biggest difference for someone who is differently abled. For our offices, we have put in desks, we've put in different keyboard systems in order to help people. We have to do civil service testing, so different technologies to make sure that those things are accessible. Things like the doorway that you mentioned, it's one of those issues that wouldn't necessarily come to someone's mind. So I'm sure an act like this would help put that into the forefront. I know we make sure that we use it all the time, but it must have been a challenge ahead of time before this was enacted for people to really think about those differences.
Absolutely. And it's so important that just generally people understand the ADA. And there's still a lot of people who are learning every day and ask questions, which is great. I'm still learning ADA. I mean, I do this for a living, and I taught a course here at SRU as an adjunct faculty, but we're all still learning. And that's one of the most important aspects. It's a big law that encompasses many different things, but there's so much to learn. And continue to learn.
Absolutely. Do you think there was any one major catalyst that drew the government to enact this, or was it a bunch of little things that kind of built up on each other?
It was probably a bunch of little things, but equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities, equal opportunity for employment. And like I said, it affects like the public sectors and education the most. And so in large corporations and large businesses. And so to employ individuals with disabilities or to make your company or building accessible, this law was needed to do that because, like I said, there are so many things that the law encompasses. And so, yeah, I bet it was just a bunch of little things built up over time. But the most important aspect is just protecting those individuals and not being able to discriminate against them as an employer because they do have a disability and their needs are obviously different than somebody else that works at the company. Or corporation. And so being able also to provide those needs to a person with a disability, like we said, a special desk or a chair or a larger space for a wheelchair user or a special phone, computer systems, assistive technology in general, even somebody who may use or have a service animal with them, just providing a space of comfort for that individual as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mhm.
And do you think there were any historical or sociological implications that came out of the Americans with Disabilities Act,
Um,
looking back on it?
sure. When I think about that question, the first thing I think about is it was probably earth shattering for the United States when this happened. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just a change of life and it's huge. I mean, and it affects schools and companies and businesses and buildings. It affected so many different people in so many different ways. And obviously this was for the best. But it probably still, people are still bringing things up to code to accommodate the needs of an individual with a disability. And so I think that's probably the biggest implication or historical aspect is just navigating the waters of trying to make things accessible and trying to meet the requirements of the ADA in a reasonable way for companies, corporations, schools, businesses, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine it must have been a shock when this first came out. I know with the City of Pittsburgh, we have several different employees that deal with this on a day-to-day, that work with accommodations, that work with people with different abilities, from recruitment to employment to everything in between. And even this many years, 30 years after the ADA is enacted, and as we're moving forward, we're always learning new things. So it must have been a huge change. And I always say, when you know better, you do better.
Absolutely.
So as the 30 years has gone by, I'm sure it's strengthened more and more, but it must have been quite a surprise or a challenge for employers at the time.
Yeah, and for an employer or a place of business to learn the implications of the law and how that would affect them, that's huge in itself. And it takes somebody who understands the law to be an expert to educate those. And that's what I try to do in my role here at SRU as a director of disability services. I make academic accommodations for students, but my colleagues call on me and ask me questions about the law. And, sometimes I have to go and research what they're asking. I don't know it all because it is huge and there's so many aspects to it. But exactly, when you know better, you do better. And that's the most important piece.
Absolutely. And so, on a personal level, you have been working in this space for quite a bit of time. What makes you passionate about it? Why did you choose to go into this field?
I guess it's just empowering and helping people with disabilities empower themselves and to be good self-advocates. That's one of the biggest things. When I work with students here at SRU, I love working with students. Obviously, that's my role, but it is a really powerful moment when you can work with a student and process with them through their academic career and help them with accommodations to remove the barriers in the classroom. And so when you get to that point where a student feels comfortable and they're being good self-advocates, that to me is just worth it in itself. I have a sister with a disability, and so same thing, just helping her be a good self-advocate and trying to teach those around us, even just proper language and person-first language. I mean, that's something hard. And when you talk to people, even people with disabilities or people who have children with disabilities, using that person first language is super important, but some people, it doesn't bother them and they're fine if you don't use person first. But all of those things come into play, and there's so many aspects. And the biggest thing, again, is to learn and to know what you can do better. But I love empowering students, and I love the work that I do here, and I love working with my colleagues to help them learn all about this space.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be something that you have a passion about, and with any position, what you're passionate about really can drive you. But it sounds like you've definitely found a really great piece of the world to dig into, which is always so exciting.
Yes.
I think there are any really important pieces or things that we should highlight or take away from the ADA overall, or anything that you have felt was really important to you or was sort of a guiding post for you?
Sure. I think it's important to understand equal opportunity, and that it is a civil rights act to protect people with disabilities from discrimination in the workplace. And again, I always go back to, there are people that unknowingly violate the ADA. And I'm not condoning that, but I think that it's such a broad, huge law. And so if you're willing to learn, I think that that's the most important aspect. A lot of people are afraid to violate it, and so they try to overcompensate in everything that they do. And I don't think that that's always necessary. And I also think it's really important just to ask the person you're working with, if they have a disability, like, how can I help you? What are your needs? What barriers can I remove for you? How can we work to do this together? How can you be a good self-advocate, and how can I help you do that? Ask if you don't know. And I think that's important. And some people look at an individual with a disability to ask. Most people with disabilities want you to ask, and they want you to communicate with them just like you would someone without a disability. And so I think that that's the most important takeaway, and one of the most important messages that I can give to anybody who's interested in the field or just in general. Just ask if you don't know.
Absolutely. It really struck me how you talked about helping your students become self-advocates, or watching them become those self-advocates. Do you have any advice or sort of a first step if one of our employees was looking to take that leap to become their own self-advocate?
I think that it takes time to learn, but I also think it's really important to speak up for yourself and to say, like, here for students, what I have them do is, if they're afraid to talk with their faculty because they're transitioning from high school, and in high school you have a team of teachers and counselors that do those important steps for you. And here in higher ed, we try to do that in our office here of Disability Services, but we have a lot of students. And so we have about 600 to 700 students that we work with here. And so I tell them, like, schedule a meeting with the person that you want to talk to about your disability. Take your accommodation letter, because we process and create accommodation letters for students. Take your accommodation letter with you, sit down and discuss what are your barriers and what you need from that individual. And if it doesn't go well, then ask me to step in. But that is like the first step: scheduling an appointment, creating a time to say, this is important to me and I want to talk to you about it, and this is what makes me successful in an academic setting, and these are the challenges that I may face that I need your help with. So it sounds easier said than done, obviously, but those are things that we work up over time. And we practice. I practice with my students on what they're going to say. Some students come in here and they're ready for the challenge, and they know what they need to do. And some, maybe a little more shy, or just may never have to do that for themselves. And so we work on that together. And we sometimes schedule weekly or bi-weekly meetings with our students to just talk about those things, and how we talk to people we work with, etc. How to do a job interview, or let's have a mock interview. And we work with our colleagues on campus to do all of those things. So it's a group effort for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. For our employees on week 3, we're going to talk a lot more about the process of requesting accommodations and really who to talk to. But in the meantime, the Department of Human Resources and Civil Service is that great first step. Those are some really great tidbits for us to take back as a team as well, to be able to say, okay, here are some things that we can do and some common sense steps that we can really take to be those advocates for our employees and to help our employees advocate for themselves. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we also here try to host like workshops, um, and just have even group meetings, and the students obviously have to agree, and we keep everything confidential, but we do have those little workshops for faculty, staff, and students separately, and we go around and we talk to the big departments on campus, and we work with the deans of the colleges. So there's so many things that we do across here, and we have a lot of really great partners on campus, and the university does a really good job at a cohesive team effort in this, working with students with disabilities.
Okay, fantastic. Absolutely. Well, that is all of the formal questions that I have for you. Are there any other tidbits or takeaways that you think that we should walk away with?
No, I think I mentioned all the things that I wanted people to take away. I think the most important thing that I always love to say the most, or to speak the most about, is just to, if you don't know what a person with a disability may need, just ask them. I think in communication, I think that's important. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. I mean, don't get too personal, but ask how you can help if you're just not sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And we will be seeing you again for week 2. So we look forward to getting to hear a little bit more from you at that time. In the meantime, I want to sign off by saying happy birthday, ADA. Dr. Burick, would you mind wishing the ADA happy birthday with me?
Sure. Happy birthday, ADA.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And have a great day. We will see you next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.